In this video, I'm gonna share with you my favorite settings for the GoPro Hero 5. Hello YouTube, my name is Ryan Timms and I am a video creator. Now I make a living doing video production commercially for businesses. I do real estate tours, all kinds of different video needs, but I'm having so much fun with my GoPro Hero 5. Now I'm amazed at the quality of these action cameras. I made another video where I talk about how to get really good audio out of your Hero 5. So if you haven't seen that, check this link somewhere in the corner. I'll put one up and you can go back and watch that video talking about how to rig up a Rode VideoMic Pro to your GoPro Hero 5. Now in this video, I want to talk about the settings that I use, some different settings that I think will work in different situations. So if you're a vlogger and you want to use a Hero 5, I'm going to talk about those settings. I'm going to talk about capturing action. I'm going to talk about what I think the best settings are for 4K and what I think the best settings are for 1080. And I'm going to talk about the best settings for color correcting and color grading the Hero 5 footage to get a very cinematic look. Now I'm going to switch over. Now you can see my Hero 5 here, and the settings that I typically use are 2.7K at 30 frames per second in linear field of view. Now I think that this is going to be the best setting for a vlogger or somebody that wants to capture any kind of interview or somebody talking if you have nice mic to go with the GoPro, or if you're recording your audio externally, like through your phone, through some kind of smart lav, or you're recording audio on a different camera. I think that this linear field of view is the most realistic looking. It doesn't distort the image a whole bunch. And I just generally like the way that this looks the best. So any of the videos that you see from me on YouTube or Instagram are going to be using these settings. Now, for audio settings, to access the audio settings, you have to swipe down on the menu, you click on preferences here, and you got to scroll way, way, way down, almost to where it asks you if you want to format the card, and you'll see this setting that says audio input. Now, I was just testing the audio, so it says line in, but the setting that I almost always use is standard when I'm using an external microphone. Now, you will only be able to access this menu if you're using the setup that I talked about in my other video, where I have the GoPro accessory to plug in a microphone. I'm hooking it up with the Rode VideoMic Pro. That's the only way that this menu isn't going to be grayed out, but I always use the standard audio profile. Now, let me tell you why. Somebody in the comments of my last video said something about bumping up the Rode mic to +20 and that the amps in the GoPro would fight against it and that I would get a cleaner signal. I found that to be completely false. I did some tests with different settings throughout the weeks, but I recorded something today that I'll put up now showing both settings. Testing 1, 2, this is the Rode VideoMic Pro set at 0 dB in a very echoey room. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2. Check 1, 2, this is the Rode VideoMic Pro at +20 dB in standard setting. Checking the microphone in a very echoey room. 1, 2, check 1, 2. So I really don't recommend changing this audio input setting. It's default to standard when you plug in a mic, and I think that that is the best way and the cleanest way to get good sound. What's going to increase the quality of sound is the type of mic that you use. So if you're using a cheap mic, like a VideoMic Go or something of lesser quality that you can get online, you're gonna get a more muddy signal. But if you're using something like a Rode VideoMic or a VideoMic Pro, then you're gonna get a really good signal in, and that's gonna translate. The GoPro's gonna be able to handle that just fine. And with a little bit of tweaking in post, you can clean that up even more. Now, jumping back over to the GoPro, here are the settings that I typically leave the GoPro at. I have the color set to GoPro. I have the white balance set to either 55K or maybe 4,000 or 3,000. If I were indoors, I would change this, but I always make sure that I set a manual white balance, especially if I plan on color correcting the footage, because if this is changing and doing all kinds of wacky things in the middle of my clip, then that's gonna screw up my grade and I'm not gonna be able to use anything nice like a LUT or have really good control over the color in the image. So this is a super important step. I leave the shutter at auto. I know that you're supposed to follow the 180-degree rule, but with these cameras, I don't see that it makes a huge difference. It's difficult to get, very cinematic with these cameras. I rely more on color for the cinematic look than I do sort of following all these rules. So letting the shutter be the thing that sort of controls the exposure and knowing that it's not going to go really low. If it was really dark, it would bump the ISO up and kind of stop so that I'm not getting really bad motion blur. It's going to stay at a reasonable amount. Something that's important that I change is the sharpness to medium. Now our options here I think are low, medium, and high. It's default to high, which is a bit much. I can always add sharpening in post if I feel like I'm missing it to make it look okay. But if it's over sharpened in camera, then it's really difficult to get something that looks clean later. So I always leave this at medium. These audio settings are if I want to record a separate raw audio track, if I were doing a lot more precise stuff with the audio. You could use this to record like a low track. So let's say you were recording an interview and the person was spiking all over the place, or they were talking really loud, or they yelled all of a sudden. You could use this backup audio track to get everything that you need out of that sound. So that's what you would use this for. I'm not doing that. I'm just using it for vlogging style stuff and whatever. So I leave that off. I don't need the extra stuff. And these are the settings that I typically use. Now, when I'm in 2.7K, I leave the video stabilization on. I think that the GoPro does a great job with this. I think using some kind of a selfie stick or using it on a GorillaPod or whatever at arm's length, you're gonna get plenty stable footage. Unless you're really trying to be cinematic and you want to use this on a gimbal, then you would turn this off by hitting this button right here, and you would leave that part off. But I'm going to leave it on because that's what I like to shoot in. Now, let's talk about some other settings that you may use on this camera. You change the resolution by going in here. Now, if we're going to shoot in 4K, that limits our field of view to wide, which is okay. Now, when would you shoot in 4K? Well, typically you want to shoot in 4K and deliver in 1080p. What that means is you're downsizing the image in post, in your editor, whatever you're using to edit, whether that's iMovie or Premiere or Final Cut or whatever. You want to make sure that you are downsizing that 4K clip and that you're delivering the final video in 1080. That is important for a number of different reasons. One, you're going to get a sharper 1080 image. You're going to get more color data to that 1080 image. So if you are color correcting and grading this footage like I'm going to, then I'm getting a lot more data shooting in 4K, but I lose being able to shoot in the linear profile that I like. So that's why I always opt for the 2.7K. But if you're going to use 4K and you want something that looks really cinematic, you can change this to 24 frames a second or 30 frames a second based on what your needs are. 24 frames a second is going to look more like it was shot on film, and that's typically what people use for like YouTube videos and short films and stuff. And that's what you watch when you go to the movie theaters, is 24 frames a second. So that's how you would change that. Depending on what you're shooting is going to determine what this frame rate needs to be. So if you're shooting a lot of action, you probably want to leave it at 30p. But if you're shooting, let's say a short film or some kind of narrative or people talking, something that you want to look very cinematic, then you'll switch it to 24 frames a second. When I'm shooting in 4K and these videos that I make for YouTube, I'm shooting in 30 frames per second. So all these cameras right now, I leave them all at 30 frames per second. I think that looks better online. For some projects, 24p is the way to go, and some things that you'll see on my channel will be 24p. But for the most part, stuff that I see, stuff that I deliver to clients, a lot of what I'm using, stuff that you see on TV, all of that is going to be 30p. Now back to our resolution. If we want to shoot something in 1080, our options here change a little bit. We get access to super view, which is a really good fisheye effect. That's going to be good for like skate parks and surfing and underwater stuff. This is going to distort the image a lot. It's going to be very bubble, and some people really want that. And you can access that in 1080 here at 30 frames per second. Note that I am keeping all of these Pro Tune settings the same regardless of the frame rate and resolution that I'm picking. I'm pretty confident that these are going to give you the best image regardless of the resolution that you use. But just be smart about what you think you need for your project. If you want to shoot some slow-mo stuff to go along with the really pretty 4K footage, then bump it down to 1080 and shoot it at 120 frames per second. You're gonna get really crisp slow motion that way, and it'll cut together just fine with the 4K video. Now, the last thing that I wanna talk about in this video is this color setting here, where we have the option of the GoPro color profile or the flat color profile. Now, if you don't understand color profiles and why you would wanna use this, basically the flat color profile is trying to conserve dynamic range, which is the difference between the very, very light and the very, very dark parts of the image. What your camera is trying to do when you shoot in a flat color profile is preserve the information that's in the highest of highlights. So in the areas of the image that are white, they're almost blown out, there's no information there. In the areas that are really, really black, we're trying to conserve the information in these two areas so that when we mess with the footage in post, we can save some of this information, giving us what appears to be a wider dynamic range, which is gonna be closer to what your eye sees and closer to what cameras can produce that are $50,000, $60,000, $200,000 cameras that have tons and tons of dynamic range. You're trying to fake that with these little cameras. And movies and bigger productions, they're all shooting in what's called log, which is just like this flat color profile where they're doing the same kind of thing, trying to preserve that information in the highs and the lows. And then they color grade it and they do all kinds of stuff to tweak the image and make it look like what you see when you go to the movies. Now with a GoPro, is that really gonna help you? I don't prefer it. I've shot enough in this flat profile and in the GoPro color profile that I definitely prefer the image to be closer to what I want it to look like than further away. So I always leave it on the GoPro color profile, and I highly, highly recommend that you do the same. Even if you think that you're going to be doing some tweaking in post, leave it on the GoPro color profile, set your white balance to what you think you want the image to look like. So let's say you know you're gonna color grade it to be something that's very cool, like you want it to be sort of a wintry, cold colors, a lot of blues, then change your white balance to something that's gonna give you something closer to that. And vice versa, if you're shooting, let's say you're in a desert and you're shooting something cool in a desert and you want it to look very red, you wanna have a lot of those warm tones, then set your white balance to a higher number. The closer that you can get in camera, the easier time that you're gonna have in post. No matter if you're using LUTs or you're coloring it yourself or all you're doing is correcting the footage, always try and get as close as you can in camera, especially with the GoPro Hero5. Now, I have a question for everybody watching the video that made it this far. What editing software are you using to edit the clips that you get from your GoPro? Are you interested in color grading and stretching the images that come out of the GoPro to make it look more cinematic? If so, how do you plan on doing that? I'd be interested to see if most people are using, like I edit everything in Premiere. Are you using Premiere, are you using Final Cut, or are you using something like iMovie or the software provided by GoPro? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe so that you can see all my latest videos as soon as they come out.